So, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. We know how hard these sessions after lunch are. Actually, we know it very well because we come from Spain, and in our talks after lunch, we leave like 5 hours for a small power nap, and then we have the session. So, but sorry, this is Netherlands, and no time for siesta. So, okay, so we have divided this talk in 3 parts. Okay. First, we will explain, and you hopefully understand what continuous delivery is and what its benefits are. Second, we will see how a continuous delivery pipeline works with a sample library application. And finally, you will learn how to quickly set up your own continuous delivery pipeline. Okay, so why are we talking today about continuous delivery? Why is it so important? Well, because our main purpose as software developers is to continuously deliver software of value to our customers. Or in other words, okay, we want to deliver better software and we want to do it continuously. Okay, so we want continuous delivery, but what's continuous delivery? So let's try to define it in the context of the process of software production, okay? So imagine you have made some code changes and you are testing them locally with some unit tests, and then you package it and everything works. The next step is you want to make sure that your changes work with those of your teammates, and for this purpose you deploy everything in a test server and you run some integration test, okay? This process typically repeats every multiple times a day, and is what we call continuous integration. But now that you've run local and tests in your and integration tests in your CI, it would be a nice idea to validate if your changes work on environment that really have the same condition that you will find in production. And depending on the time and the resources of these validation tests, for instance, you can think about traffic load or massive data upgrades, you will need one or more servers to run these tests. But the idea is that by the end of this line, your changes must be ready for production, okay? And this is the main purpose of continuous delivery: to put your changes into the hands of your consumer in a safely, reliable, and continuous way. The put into production in a continuous delivery approach is by definition performed manually. If you wanted to perform the deployment automatically, then you would be doing what we call continuous deployment. This decision completely depends on and exclusively depends on your business strategy, because from the technical perspective, in both cases, your changes will be ready for production. Okay, but of course, adopting a continuous delivery strategy involves an investment in both time and resources. And you may be wondering, is it worth it? Now let's see some of its benefits. Well, the first and main benefit of continuous delivery are low-risk releases, okay? You may be thinking, okay, if I'm releasing more frequently, there are maybe more chances that something goes wrong. But it is actually the opposite. The more frequently you release, probably the smaller your changes are, and so are the probabilities that something goes wrong. And if eventually something went wrong, it would be much easier and faster to find and fix whatever the issue is, okay? The second and very important benefit of continuous delivery is a faster time to market, okay? And this ability to put your changes into the hands of your consumer in a quickly and reliable way allows developers to create better software by reducing the feedback cycle. Of course, this is very related with the third benefit, higher quality. Remember, you will be testing your changes in environments that reproduce the conditions that your product will find in production. So this results in issues being detected earlier, and finally, from your consumer perspective, your product will have a higher quality. And this is a very common problem. How many times does it happen that you ask your developers, is everything ready? Is the product ready to be put into production? And they say yes, because we developers are optimistic people. But by adopting continuous delivery, you will have a more reliable measure of your progress, because you will get reports on the results of the test in each of these stages, and you will see your application working on environments that really resemble those in production. And last but not least, by making tedious tasks, such as delivery or testing automatic, and freeing time for more attractive tasks, you will end up by having happier developer teams. Okay, and how does this fit? How does continuous delivery fit in Liferay? So as you probably know, Liferay has moved from a monolithic on-premise application model towards a more distributed service platform model, okay? In other words, Liferay DXP opens a new scenario of software as a service applications that, among other requirements, need high availability, zero-fault tolerance, and shorter release cycles, okay? And some of the applications and projects that Ed Chang presented yesterday during the keynote, or Sino mentioned this morning, follow these criteria. And because of this, continuous delivery has become a keystone for us. Okay, and how are we using continuous delivery at Liferay? So basically, what we're doing now is we are adding a continuous delivery pipeline to our application. I will now explain what a continuous delivery pipeline is, okay? So, of course, everything starts with some changes in our code, and we will, once this code has been validated by the development team, those changes will be added to our repository, and automatically we will run our CI test in the CI server, okay? If the test passed, then we will generate a snapshot of our application and push it to a distribution repository. And here comes the new stuff. So the CI system will also automatically trigger what we call this delivery pipeline. The delivery pipeline may have one or more environments. There's no science, there's no specific rule about this. It depends on your requirements. And on each of these environments, we will deploy and test our snapshot. Only if the test passes on one of the stages, we will move into the next one. And by the end of this line, our application will be ready for production. Here, we tag our app in our distribution repository. And since we are doing continuous delivery, remember, we require a manual approve. After this manual approve, then we finally deploy our application into the production environment. Here, we could even perform more tests, like health tests or whatever we need. So this slide, shows the theory of a continuous delivery pipeline. But how can we implement one? So today we will present a possible approach, a possible implementation. There are many other possibilities to create a continuous delivery pipeline for Liferay applications. Okay, you can recognize many popular applications. So, for instance, for the code repository, we're using GitHub. We're using Travis as our CI system. And for the actual continuous delivery pipeline, we are using Amazon Web Services application. For instance, to orchestrate the deployment and testing in each of these stages, we're using AWS Code Pipeline. And since we're using Docker images, our distribution repository is Docker Hub, and we are deploying them on each stage using Elastic Beanstalk. And finally, we run our tests using Code Build, which also provides all the reports and logging we need. Okay, so now Rubén will show you how an example of how a continuous delivery pipeline works with a Liferay application and how you can create your own.
Thank you, Eduardo. Okay, so now that we know what continuous delivery is and we have learned about its benefits, we are going to take a look behind the curtains and try to understand what happens during each step of a continuous delivery pipeline from the time a developer makes a change in the code until that code is deployed into production. Okay, and in order to showcase that, we are going to use this application, which you may already be familiar with if you attended the presentation by Julio and Cristina on behavior-driven development yesterday. And we are going to assume that the current version of our application displays a list of characters, and that we already have deployed this application into 3 different environments in AWS. Development, here, pre-production, and production. Those environments are using Docker and Elastic Beanstalk. And we now want to push a change into that application. So we actually want to create a different visualization for the characters. And for that, we need to add a button to be able to display the characters in a different way. So let's see how we do that. The first thing is we make the code change. In this case, it's very simple. We just add a string there, and we have our additional button to display the characters. Okay, now the developer that has made this change opens a pull request, and that triggers a build in Travis. This build in Travis will run all the tests of this specific branch, of this feature branch. And once those tests are successful, another developer will merge those changes into master, and that will trigger an additional build in Travis, this time building the master branch. So once that Travis build is successful, what will happen is that we will have a new Docker image packaging the application with the change we just built. And that Docker image is published into a Docker Hub repository, and it's tagged with a specific version. So the next change and the last change that this Travis build needs to do is actually to automatically update the deployment repository that we just mentioned before. And this will control the version of the application that is going to be deployed into AWS. Okay, the continuous delivery pipeline is coupled to this deployment repository. So whenever there is a new commit on the master branch, the pipeline executes. And the first stage of the pipeline is actually getting the code from GitHub. So what happens is the code from this deployment repository is downloaded to an S3 bucket, and also the code of the application, which contains the test, is also downloaded into the S3 bucket. You can see in the screenshot that in addition to the intermediate artifacts that are created during the execution of the pipeline, there's also a Docker configuration file. And what this allows is it allows the pipeline to pull Docker images from a private Docker repository. Okay, so once we have the specification that contains the version of the Docker image that we want to deploy, the next stage in the pipeline is to actually deploy the Docker image into an Elastic Beanstalk environment. In this time, it's the development environment. This is all done automatically by the pipeline. No, the developer does not need to do anything for that to happen. So the next stage, once the application has been deployed, is running the first set of tests on the development environment. If you listened to Eduardo before, you noticed that we already ran some tests on Travis, right? However, the environment where the application was running when we were executing the test in Travis may be quite different from the actual environment where our application will run in production. So there are some problems that we may only uncover while testing the application on an environment that is as similar as possible to our final production environment. So in this case, we are running functional tests using Cucumber, and we see there the result of the tests. If any of those tests fails, then the pipeline will stop at that point, and no more deployments will be automatically done into the next environments. At this time, the developer would need to go back to the code, fix the problem, and then do a new change that will start a new execution. If the tests were successful, then the pipeline would continue on to the next environment, deploying the code into the pre-production environment. So this pre-production environment tends to be much more stable than the previous environment. Why? Because there's already a first line of defense. So for example, if we are working with a distributed team and this distributed team depends on our application, we probably will tell them to actually use this environment on pre-production. So whenever we break the development environment, they are not interrupted or they are not affected by our problems. Okay, once the application has made it to the pre-production environment, we can run a different set of tests on the pre-production environment. Usually these are load tests or stability tests that try to find out whether our application has problems that may only be visible when they're under specific circumstances. So for example, many users trying to access our application during a long time, or memory leaks that may be detected only once the application has been running for a long time. Any possible problem that it's not so easy to find in the development environment. So the screenshot shows, for example, the test reports of some karate tests that in this case test our APIs. So we are not testing the UI any longer here. Okay, and if our changes have made it this far, we now give a business user the possibility to decide whether this specific version should be deployed to production. From a technical point of view, we are always ready to deploy the version to production, but from the business point of view, we may not want to deploy that often, and we may want to, I don't know, deploy several times a day, a week, or a month, depending on our use case. So finally, once the business user has made this manual approval, we finally have our change deployed into the production, and our users can access the change. Okay, so with that, we finished the second part of our presentation, where we wanted to understand what happens during each step of a continuous delivery pipeline. And now, as the third and final part, we would like you to learn or how you could easily set up such a continuous delivery pipeline in a fast way. What do you need for that? You need a GitHub account, a Travis account, Docker Hub account, and an AWS account. And what are the steps that you need to follow if you want to set up this example on your own system, on your own AWS systems? Well, first, we have made available this application in GitHub, so you would need to fork that application and clone it. You will also need to fork the deployment repository. You don't need to clone that, since the changes that will be made are done automatically, so you don't need to make those changes locally. You will need to enable that application to be built in Travis, and you will need to set a set of environment variables that would allow the pipeline to create all these artifacts for you. All that is specified in the repository. Then finally, in order to create this delivery pipeline, you will just need to make a change. And what happens when you make a change and the first build of your pipeline runs? So first, as we mentioned before, tests are run, a new Docker image is published, and a commit is made to this repository. And now the interesting part, only during the first execution of the build, we invoke AWS services through those scripts that are also available to you to set up the pipeline. And not only the pipeline, but also all the prerequisites that are needed, that need to be created for your pipeline to work. What are those prerequisites? The S3 bucket that we mentioned before, the Elastic Beanstalk environments that will run your application package in Docker, with some IAM policies in order that will allow this to happen. Some code build projects that will be the ones responsible for executing the tests in the different environments. And finally, once all those prerequisites are in place, we are in the position that we can create the continuous delivery pipeline. Okay, so as a result of this Travis build, you will have your application deployed into 3 different environments, and it will be available on those links that you see on the screen. And you have your code pipeline already set up. So what happens if you now make a second change to the application? Well, the pipeline is already in place, so we won't need to recreate it. The 3 steps we mentioned before will be executed again. And now this time, since the pipeline is coupled to that deployment repository, the pipeline will be automatically triggered by your change. And as long as the tests are successful, the development and pre-production environments will be updated automatically. Then you have the chance to approve the change to go to production, and you will have your application available in the production link as well.
Okay. Thank you, Rubén. So, well, don't worry about the links that Rubén showed earlier, because we will publish all the slides and all the materials after the session. We show you some other interesting resources. For instance, continuousdelivery.com contains some definitions and best practices about continuous delivery. Also very interesting, AWS continuous delivery, to learn about the tools that Amazon Web Services provides for continuous delivery. Again, we showed you today a possible implementation, but there are many other ways. Brett, for instance, mentioned CloudFormation yesterday for configuration files. And finally, we are writing a series of blog entries at Liferay to cover the contents of this session. So you can find more information in more details there. Okay. So with this, we are reaching the end of our presentation. Let's wrap up by reviewing what we learned today, okay? So the first thing we learned is that continuous delivery allows delivering changes quickly and reliable to your customers. Next, we've seen how a continuous delivery pipeline works. We saw it at work with a real Liferay application. And finally, we hope that you are now able to create your own continuous delivery pipeline with the materials and the script that we provided. So I think that's all we have to show today. Do we have time for some question and answer?
Hello. Yeah, here you go. So yeah, thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, Rubén, for this presentation. Right, and there is one note actually, Eduardo mentioned it during his presentation, and I want to just repeat this. Like, for you guys who are taking photos, you guys, everything we see here, we're gonna have it online, even the recording, everything. So you guys can go online, download the presentation, download the recording, so you guys have access to everything, right? So we're gonna have 2 questions. So anyone want to ask any question here? Yes, no? No?
Don't be shy.
Okay, I guess no question. All right. Thank you.
Over there.
Here? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, hello. My question is if the production environment is also in Docker.
Sorry?
The production environment is also a Docker image deployed to a Docker
In our
container.
example, yeah, it is. Yeah, we're using, for this case, we're using Docker in all the stages. So the idea is not that you have to use Docker in production, but again, we insist that wherever you test your changes in the process of delivery, that environment must be as similar as possible to the one you will have in production. Okay?
One more question. One more free questions. Right here.
Over there? Yeah.
I just have a question. Thank you for the presentation. So it means that all the environments are configured the same, because when you first time build the artifact, it remains the same for all the pipeline, or the configuration is injected differently for each environment?
we have the possibility to specify different configuration for each environment. In our example, I think all environments are the same, which is of course the ideal case, because depending on the size of your production environment, you may not be able to afford such a big environment for all your intermediate environments. So, but we give the possibility to, for example, configure your environments in a different way.
Because that's what, for example, we try to deliver through the workspace, and there is different configuration for each environment. And when I build through workspace, then I have different distribution bundle per environment, and that's we feel it's not ideal solution. Try to find some different way.
Okay, so the Docker image is the same one. We are deploying the same Docker image to all the environments, but then the configuration. So, for example, if you are hitting an external database or an external Elastic Beanstalk, sorry, an Elasticsearch index, then you can configure that, and that of course needs to be different for every environment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I see there is 1 more minute, so if anyone will have any quick question, like 1 more question, it's gonna be the last one. All right, so if no question now, Eduardo and Robin, they're always around, so you guys can go and talk to them, and they're gonna answer you for sure. So thank you again, guys. And